Good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, February the 18th, 2020. It is currently 9:34 p.m. Central Time. Well, before we get started, before I get to the topic, before I even introduce it, I need to offer up a word of warning. I need to try to warn some of you that this may not be the episode of the Theology Central podcast that you should listen to. This may be an episode that you want to skip, and maybe there will be a time later that you can come back to it. But this is going to be a very intense discussion that could be very emotional for a lot of people. If you are an individual and in your life, you've experienced a great tragedy, maybe the death of a child, the death of a family member, maybe a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister. If you've experienced any kind of tragedy, death, suffering of any kind, we're going to be talking about things that could be very upsetting to you, that could really make you very emotional. If you are facing or are currently in right now a very difficult situation, you're currently experiencing, something really bad, and you're looking into the future, and it does not look like things are going to go well. Again, I want to warn you that this may not be the episode for you. But sometimes we have to speak of difficult things. Because, now listen to me carefully, there is a tendency that when tragedy happens, when bad times happen, that our perception becomes greatly impacted in a negative way. Tragedy, trouble, trial can cause us to not perceive things as they really are. It can greatly impact the way we perceive things. Our perception can greatly be altered by difficulty and tragedy. Now, some will say that at some point after the tragedy, who knows when the grieving process takes place, all of those natural things, that many will say that at some point later, the tragedy actually brought clarity to their life. It actually helped the way they perceive things. But I believe that there is a danger that sometimes difficulty and tragedy alters our perception. It creates a wrong perception, and sometimes you have to try to correct that wrong perception, and it can make people very upset. If someone has experienced a tragedy, and as a result of that tragedy, their perception is flawed, and you come along and say, hey, your perception is wrong, it's almost like ripping a bandage off a wound, and it's going to create great pain and great discomfort. And I don't want to inflict pain or discomfort on anyone, but sometimes you have to say, I think maybe we're viewing this in an incorrect way. And what we're going to be talking about deals specifically with a book in the Bible. See, I believe sometimes a narrative gets placed upon a book of the Bible, and then everyone who picks it up, because this narrative is just taught over and over and over, it becomes the default narrative that we read into the text, that this is the way we read the story. This is what the story means, even if the text itself doesn't support that narrative, doesn't support us reading the book that way. I believe this is a problem. And in this particular case, why this becomes such a difficult thing to fix is because it is connected to a story about death, about tragedy, about suffering. And many people turn to this book for some kind of answer, for some kind of comfort. You see, whenever we experience great pain and suffering and tragedy, it's natural. We want an answer. We want to know why. We want to understand why this occurred. We want that. We need that. We crave that. And so because we need it so bad, because we crave it so bad, we have a tendency to perceive an answer, to perceive a reason, to perceive a purpose, maybe even when there isn't a reason or a purpose that we can truly understand. Maybe we're not actually given a reason or a purpose, but we want one, so we assign a reason and a purpose to give us some sense of comfort. But maybe our perception is completely wrong. Now, I know this is very sensitive, but I believe this is a very important conversation. So I pray that I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to cause anyone any pain. I know from my own personal experience as a young person, when my mother died, people said all kinds of crazy things to me. I think they were trying to give me answers. They were trying to give me purpose and reason to comfort me. But again, I believe in many cases they were trying to give me a false perception of how to understand the death of my mother. And I think sometimes tragedy, difficult pain, and suffering, I think sometimes there isn't an easy answer. Sometimes I don't think there's a comforting answer. And I think we have to sometimes be willing to face that. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set down my iPad. I'm going to pick up my Bible. All right? I'm really nervous. I'm really nervous about doing this. I really am, but I'm not doing this just to be sensational. I'm not doing this to just, this would be a controversial subject and I'll get a lot of attention. I'm not doing this for that. Please do not assign false motives, all right? This all came about, let me make it very clear and and I'm going to be very honest with you and very transparent. Earlier today, now you can't see into this room, but I'm standing in front of a microphone. Directly behind me is a couch. Earlier today, I was sitting on that couch and I was reading a book. And as I was reading the book, I began to go, wait a minute, I don't think that that's a fair way. I think this book is assigning a narrative to a book in the Bible that's not, I don't know if it's justified. I don't know if the Bible supports this narrative that this book is giving to this biblical book. And so it started bothering me, and I started thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what? I need to talk about it. But then I was like, whoa, man, you talk about this, you're going to upset some people. So that's why I'm giving the warning. So I'm just giving everyone time. Stop. You can just, and it's perfectly okay. If only 3 people listen to this, hopefully it'll be 3 people that this has a profound impact and really helps them. It's going to be uncomfortable and we're not going to like it, but I think it's needed. All right. The first thing we're going to look at is I'm going to bring 2 passages together, and I want these passages, I want this to really stand out to you, right? I have my Bible open to the book of Job. Now, if you're familiar with the Bible at all, you know this story, but we're going to look at this story in a way that you've probably never considered it, okay? The book of Job. Let's start in verse 1. Job chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Right? So we know we're getting ready to read about some horrible things getting ready to happen in Job's life, but we know it's not because this is not punishment. This is not chastisement, because according to the book of Job, he was a man that was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. Now, I want you to pay close attention to verse 2. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. 7 sons and 3 daughters. 10 children Job had 10 children. Please keep that in mind. Now, we go to Job chapter 1. And we'll go to verse 17. Well, we can go to verse 16. All right. All of these tragedies, one after another, Job is getting this information. All of these tragedies are happening. One after another tragedy, another tragedy. He's getting all of these reports, and they just keep coming in, one after another. For example, and there came a messenger. This is Job chapter 1, verse 14. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Now, please note, there are servants there who die. I'm not ignoring that in any way, shape, or form, but I'm focusing in on a very important part of this narrative, and that's what I really want us to focus on. Verse 17, Job chapter 1. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So we got 2 passages where servants are being killed. Then we get these next 2 verses are very important. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons, speaking to Job, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Job's children are killed. Job's children die. He had 10. They're in this house. Note how the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. That servant's the only one left to tell the story. Everyone else is dead. 10 children gone in an instant. Now we're all, and I can't say that we all are familiar, but if you know the Bible, you're very familiar with this story. Now, you also know that after we read one tragedy after another tragedy after another tragedy after another tragedy, we know that immediately after all of these tragedies are outlined in the preaching, after all of these tragedies are outlined in the small group, after all of these tragedies are outlined in Bible study, Sunday school, wherever this is being taught, immediately after this has all been outlined, and we're like, look at this tragedy, look at this tragedy, look at this tragedy. Immediately after the tragedies have been clearly detailed, all of the attention, all of the discussion turns to Job. It turns to Job. On one hand, we really look at it in the following ways. Number one, we look at how Job responded to this tragedy. We really emphasize that, and you can read it in verse 20. Then Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, fell down upon the ground and worshiped, and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. All right. So the first thing we do is, after this tragedy is outlined, after, they really, preach and teach this tragedy so that you can feel it, then immediately the tragedy, we turn from the tragedy and we look at how Job responded. He worshiped God. God gives, God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He did not charge God foolishly. He did not sin. Wow. What a powerful example of faith. And we see that. And so it becomes about Job's response. Then the attention comes to the response of Job's friends when they come and basically accuse him, hey, these bad things wouldn't have happened unless you have sinned. You need to repent. You need to repent. You need to repent. So it becomes about Job's response, Job's friends' response, and then at some point in the teaching of the book, everyone turns their attention to, why did this happen? Why? And we typically are told that this was done for Job's benefit. This was to help him spiritually. Let me pick up the book that I was reading earlier today, and you'll see how this goes. So the first thing we do, we focus on Job's response. Man, a man of faith, a godly man. Then we look at Job's friends. Man, they're not, how uncaring, with friends like that, who needs enemies, and we talk about, and then at some point we no matter what the text says, we try to give, there's got to be a reason why God would do this. There has to be a reason, because if you go and read the story, well, I'll just read from this book because it's going to say a lot of things that I'm about to say. So often when tragedies strike or hard times engulf us, we ask, where's God? In asking this question, we make an assumption that God must not have known what was about to befall us, or else he would have prevented it. Or we assume that God must not love us, because surely if he loved us, he would keep us from all hurtful times and hard experiences. Both assumptions are wrong. The fact is, God knows and God loves. Okay, definitely he knows. God is all-knowing, omniscient. He is all-knowing. He knows. We do believe that for God so loved the world, there is a love that he has. So he knows and he loves. Now, that's not very helpful when you just lost 10 children who just died. But let's continue. When we experience difficult times or feel great inner pain and turmoil, we usually try to assign blame. We say one of two things. Either the devil caused this, or God caused this. The greater likelihood is this: the devil caused it and God allowed it. All right. Now, to be fair, in the book of Job, I don't know if it's even that simple, because God sets up the entire situation. Satan comes to present himself, and God says, have you considered my servant Job? He brings Job up. He points Job out. He brings Job up to Satan. And obviously, if God knows all things, knows exactly what Satan is going to say. And then God sets up the entire, he orchestrates the entire situation. It's not that just the devil caused it and God allowed it. God set this entire situation up and used Satan. Satan was simply the tool being used by God for whatever purpose God wanted to accomplish. Let's continue. Consider the story of Job. Job was a man whom the Bible describes as being blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. Satan came before the Lord, and the Lord asked him, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. Please note, God's the one who brings up Job. God is the one who sets this up. Satan replied, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. God subsequently gave Satan permission to touch Job's possessions, but not Job's body. Satan moved against Job, and Job's sons and daughters, as well as all his flocks and herds and servants, died. Please note, Job's sons and daughters, as well as all his flocks and herds and servants, died. Please note, those 10 children died. Now, I want you to understand, immediately, those 10 children and those dead servants, the dead servants and the dead children, but I'm going to focus on the children because we have an emotional attachment to, our children, okay? We know this. 10 children are dead, and what happens is all preachers, all Sunday school teachers, small group leaders, and books, and when I say all, obviously there's going to be exceptions. I'm saying in a general sense, we forget about the 10 dead children. We just forget about them. And we're like, okay, what? Oh, look how Job responded. Isn't that great? Oh, look at his friends. Isn't that messed up? Okay, well, why did this happen? And then we assign some wonderful reason that this all happened, that this was wonderful for Job. And guess who just gets forgotten completely in the story? The 10 dead children. They're forgotten. We just move right along. Now, yes, and what some people will point out, but hey, he at the end of the book, he gets, more children. Yes, but his original children died. Just because if you have a child and it dies, but you get another one, it's not like replacing your favorite what object. It's not replacing an object, a car, a television. It's a human being. He lost 10 children. And they just are forgotten in this. But let's see what this book does, all right? So they all died. Job said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Job did not blame God for these tragedies. Satan again came before God, and God said, have you considered my servant Job? He still maintains his integrity. Satan said, a man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones. He will surely curse you to your face. The Lord then allowed Satan to afflict Job, but required that he spares his life. Satan caused painful sores to erupt on Job's body, from his feet to the top of his head. Job plunged into great misery. Job's wife attempted to convince Job to curse God and die. Now, a lot of times we really go after her. We really go after her and say, how dare her go to her husband and say, curse God and die. Remember, she lost 10 children as well, but we almost forget that. Because we almost forget the children. We just forget these 10 dead. They're forgotten. They are the forgotten children of the story. Our narrative just forgets about them, and we almost look at her as like, how dare her. She just lost 10 children, and her husband sitting there suffering. Who knows what she's feeling? His friends tormented him with various accusations. In the end, Job said to God, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. God surely knew. Now, listen carefully how this book now is going to take this narrative, or the narrative it's going to assign to the book. God surely knew that Job was being afflicted. He allowed it to happen for reasons that were his alone. Throughout Job's pain and losses, God never abandoned Job for even a moment. He knew at each step of the way how Job was being afflicted. God also knew how he was refining Job. There's the narrative. This whole tragedy is about the refining of Job, spiritual refining, making him better, purifying him, making him grow spiritually. And we read that and we're like, man, isn't that great? Wait. So Job's getting refined, but 10 children died. Because Job is being refined. So that we say, see, there's a purpose. There was a purpose here. Job's being refined. So it doesn't matter that 10 children died, because see, this God had a spiritual purpose in this. And we feel like that gives us an answer for the suffering. Let's continue reading. The good news for us, anytime we find ourselves being broken, is this: God sees the beginning and the end of our lives. He has a good future designed for us, one we may not experience fully on this earth. In Job's case, when Job prayed for his friends and declared that he had no questions of God, but rather that he realized he was the one whom God had the privilege to question, a position of total surrender, the Lord made Job to prosper again. He gave Job twice as much as he had before, greater flocks, more children, and the comfort and consolation of his brothers and sisters. And everyone who knew him, he lived in health to an old age. Whatever it is that we may experience and however we may be broken, God has a good end for us too. Our period of brokenness is not the end, but rather a passage and a process to a new beginning that is even more glorious. Yes, God knows and God loves. All right. So what, and in fact, I'll read this paragraph. I don't want to read this whole book, but I'll read this next paragraph. God does not allow brokenness in our lives because he is ruthless, cruel, heartless, or without compassion. No, to the contrary. God sees the full potential for our lives, and he deeply desires an intimate, loving, spiritual relationship with us. He wants to bring about our best and for us to experience him in the fullness of his love, wisdom, power, strength, and goodness. He allows brokenness in our lives in order to bring about a blessing. Now, I'll stop right there. I'm not so focused in on necessarily what that book says. I am focused in on the fact that this book does what we have a tendency to do. What we have a tendency to do is we read this horrible story of tragedy. We see Job's suffering in ways that we cannot even comprehend. We can't even imagine that economically, boom, everything is destroyed. His family dead, servants dead, cattle dead. His body is, greatly afflicted with these horrible sores. It's a horrible, horrible story. And we see the pain and suffering. And what we do is we want an answer. We want a purpose. We want a reason. Because if we can assign a reason and a purpose to Job's suffering, then we can assign the same to us. Because again, when we face suffering and tragedy, we want to have this idea that there's a reason. There's a purpose, and then we assign the reason and the purpose, right? We assign the reason and the purpose. And so we will do what this book is doing with Job. He's doing this to bless us. He's doing this to refine us. He's doing this to test our faith so our faith will be stronger and that we will grow spiritually. He's doing this to draw me closer to him. He's doing this to turn my attention from the things of this world so that I will set my affections on things above. That's why he's doing all these things. And we assure ourselves that there is a specific divine purpose. Even though we don't necessarily get that information from God, we assign it to the suffering. And I believe that we do that because we want an answer, but I believe that our perception may be flawed. Now listen to what I'm going to say. This is going to be very radical, very controversial. If we just take the book of Job alone, when you get to the end of that story, Job has questions for God, right? He has all kinds of questions. God responds with question after question after question after question. He asks Job all kinds of questions, right? Where were you when I created the world? Basically, who are you? I'm God. I'm the creator. I can do what I want to do. And finally, when it's all said and done, Job basically puts his hand over his mouth and says, I'm a fool. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm not going to speak. Listen to me carefully. In the book of Job, we are never told why God did this, what his purpose was. He doesn't tell Job why he did it. He doesn't tell Job. He doesn't even give Job the insight that we gain from reading the first part of the book of Job. We know Satan is involved and God has this thing going on. He doesn't even tell Job that. Job is left with literally no explanation, no rhyme, no reason, no purpose. We want to read into the book a purpose. We want to put a narrative over the text that says, here's the purpose, here's the purpose, here's the reason. He did this to refine him. Now, we could do some cross-referencing that the testing of our faith does purify, does refine. That can occur. Not that obviously can occur, but that can be the normal tragedies that happen in life, the normal difficulties that happen in life. So we could say that there is at least some biblical support for that idea, but I want to make this very clear. God doesn't tell Job anything. Put it this way. Job, when we go to 1 Peter, I think it's 1 Peter or maybe 2 Peter, 1 Peter, I think, about the refining of our faith, right? The testing of our faith refines it, purifies it. Okay. Let's make this very clear. I want to make this very clear. Job did not have 1 Peter. Okay. He didn't have that. So we can go back and read it into Job, but Job did not have that. Job was not given one reason. Nothing was explained to him. And I want us to understand this. And I know this is hard to understand, and I know it's uncomfortable, but I want you to hear what I'm about to say. Sometimes we try to assign reason and purpose to tragedy, but it's simply us assigning a reason to make us feel better. The reality is, sometimes we may never know the reason, we may never know the purpose, and simply trying to assign one to make ourselves feel better is not facing reality. when I'll just briefly state this. I was raised in a home where there was a lot of horrible things that went down. I'm not going to sit here and tell the story to try to get sympathy, but a lot of bad things went down. I was no longer living with my family due to some of these problems. I was in school, high school. All of a sudden, we get an overhead announcement for me and my brother to come to the principal's office. We go to the principal's office. We are told, you need to get to the hospital immediately. We get in a car. I go to Hendricks Hospital in Abilene, Texas. I go up, I believe, to the second floor, maybe the second or third floor, take a right, walk around. It curves to the left. See some people in the waiting area there. Nobody in my family will speak to me. My father doesn't speak to me. Nobody speaks to me. I'm taken into the hospital room, and there lies my mother on a hospital bed. One side of her body is kind of, almost like a seizure. It's moving back and forth. The other side is not moving at all. Basically, I'm told that, it's over. My mom, she's not completely dead yet, but basically she's gone. And within 24, 48 hours, they have to do a couple of tests on her brain to get, no brain waves, and then they will pronounce her dead. And, but that was it. That was the last time I saw my mother. She died. Now, everyone tried to tell me that there was a purpose and there was a reason. And everyone tried to tell me, just try to say all of the words you're supposed to say. I will say this. I'll never truly know. And obviously this is just a reality. We live in a fallen world. And guess what? We're all going to die. That's a reality. And the reason we die is because the wages of sin is death. Sin entered into the world. We're all sinners. We're all going to die. And I may want to assign and we're not told how that death is going to occur. It could occur in a tragic way. It could occur in a non-tragic way, but it's going to happen. And what we want to do is give a reason. We want to give a reason. We want to assign a reason to it. So here's what we do. We want to assign some reason for Job's suffering, some purpose. We want to read it into it, because if not, we're left with a story that is maddening. We're left with a story that says, wait a minute, he suffered all of this and there's no reason, there's no purpose, there's no answer. No, there's no answer. There's no purpose. Basically, what it turns to is Job surrenders and submits to God without an answer, without knowing. And that's sometimes how we have to walk through life, is if we believe there is a God, there are things about what God has done and will do and is doing that we'll never truly understand. And God is not going to necessarily outline why and how come. We can try to find scriptures that we think can explain it, but it ultimately doesn't explain it. We can find this tension as early as in the book of Genesis. Okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Amen. Okay, that's great news. He created everything. And then all of a sudden we have some serpent coming into the garden to tempt the woman. Well, wait a minute. Who let the serpent in? Who let the serpent in? And then we find out that the serpent was being used by Satan. Well, wait, who created Satan? Wait, God created Satan. Well, what? Well, he knew what Satan was going to do. Once Satan rebelled, why didn't he destroy Satan? He could have done that, but no, he lets him not only continue to exist, he allows him to go into the garden. Why? He could have kept him out of the garden. He lets him into the garden, and then he knows immediately what's going to happen, that Adam and Eve is going to sin. Now, the minute they sin, he could have destroyed them. He could have killed them and stopped everything, but he does not. He allows them to continue, and he allows them to produce children who are going to produce children who are going to produce children. And guess when you get to Genesis, I think it's chapter 5, you read this genealogy, and this phrase is repeated over and over. And he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. God could have stopped the whole death cycle by just ending Adam and Eve. But no, he allows, and he knows that because sin has entered into his creation, that all of creation is going to groan, and there's going to be pain, and there's going to be suffering, and there's going to be death, and there's going to be tragedy. He created it knowing it. He did not do anything to stop it, and he knew it was going to happen. How do we come along and we try to offer all these answers. We try to come up with a solution, but no solution ultimately works unless we basically stop God from being God that he doesn't know or he doesn't have the power, and we basically reduce God to a non-God. The reality is we don't truly understand why. We don't truly understand. And that's, I think, the point of the book of Job. Suffering without reason, suffering without understanding the purpose, yet surrenders self to God by faith, surrenders, submits. That is, to me, the power of the story is not for us to come along and try to assign reason, because whatever reason we give, and I want you to hear me carefully, whatever reason you think you can give to the story to help you ease your conscience, help you handle the story. Well, God was refining him. God was was breaking him to bless him, and you feel so good. Please remember that no matter how good it makes you feel, listen to what I'm about to say. No matter what great a purpose you can assign to it to make you feel better about the story, 10 children died. They didn't just suffer to be made more righteous or to be blessed. They died. So you're saying, hey, you know what? 10 dead children, that's okay, because God had a purpose in all of this for Job. You see, you are trying to read something in there to make yourself feel better. I think there's a book. I've got to step away from the mic for a second. I've got a book here about Job. It's laying here on the floor. Let me go pick it up. Yes, this is a Bible. It's like a Bible study guide my wife has. And when I saw the cover, I almost started laughing. Job, a story of unlikely joy. Yeah, a story of unlikely joy. Yeah, unlikely joy for whom? For Job, because he was blessed in the end, and there were great spiritual benefits, and maybe I was always taught that the reason this happened is because Job had pride. There was pride. Now, we were told it was perfect and eschewed evil, but I've always thought that he had a spiritual pride, and God used this to break him of his pride. And by the time you get to the end of the story, Job is broken and humbled. And so God used this to grow him spiritually. And then I'm like, yay, what? Wait, 10 dead children that we forget about. As soon as we read that they died, we immediately go, well, okay, why did this happen to Job? Oh, here's the reason. Oh, and it's a wonderful story. You still have 10 dead children. What about them? What about the servants who died? They don't even get named. They're just dead. They're gone. Just servants died. Okay, servants die. Kids die. Okay, but hey, there's a purpose. And then we assign a purpose that God never speaks. When he speaks to Job, he only asks him questions. Here's the thing. And I think this is very important when reading the book of Job. Sometimes, many times, maybe even most of the time, when we encounter great tragedy and great suffering, pain and death, we are left with questions, not answers. God doesn't provide an answer. He doesn't provide an answer in the text to you. He doesn't provide an answer in the text to me. But we read an answer into it. God doesn't give an answer. He just gives questions. And then we come along and say, hey, God, let me help you out with your book. Okay. We know that this book is inspired by you, but you obviously left out some verses. So we're going to come along and say, here's the reason God did this to Job, because we're going to assign purpose. Because our perception, suffering causes us to have a wrong perception. We're going to perceive it in a way to make us feel better. We need a purpose. We need a reason. And so we will perceive a purpose and a reason when none exist. I think it's too hard for us to embrace that there could be suffering But we don't know the reason and we don't know the purpose. So what can we do? Well, if we learn the lesson from the book of Job, we stop asking the question. We stop speaking. And we just surrender and submit without an answer. See, this is how we read it. Yes, you can surrender and submit to God because, see, there's a purpose in it. Here's the purpose. Now, Job didn't know the purpose, but we know the purpose. We know the reason. Job is never told, but we figured it out. God didn't bother to tell Job, but if Job would have been in our church with our pastor, then he would have heard a sermon which would have told him why it all happened. I bet you he would greatly appreciate the fact that you know more than God told him. Maybe the purpose of the story is sometimes, if there is a purpose, we don't know it, and trying to guess it is foolish. Now we can say from other scriptures that there can be a spiritual refining in tragedy. Yes, there can be a testing that can help us grow. Yes, it can reveal our weaknesses and our spiritual problems that we have in our life. But I want to make sure in the book of Job that doesn't happen. And I think we have to be very careful that we perceive tragedy in a way that actually contradicts the book of Job. Because the book of Job, no answer. Just questions. Just questions. I'm going to pick up the book of Job again. The reason some of you who may be new listening to me, the reason I explain what I'm doing is when I listen to something and there's some noise going on and I don't know what it is, it distracts me from what they're saying. So I like to just stop and let people know when I'm going to step away from the mic for a second. Even though I'm not really stepping away, I'm just reaching down, but you get the idea. I'm looking at the book of Job here. I'm moving to the end. Job chapter 38, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkened counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee an answer. For I will demand of thee, and answer thou me." And then starting in chapter 38, that's Job chapter 38. I just read verses 1 to... I just read verses 1 and 2. Starting in verse 3, all the way all the way to chapter 42, pretty much from chapter 38 to 42, God just hits him with one question after another question after another. I can't remember the total number of questions God asked, but it's overwhelming. It's maddening. It's like if you were in that situation, my kids are dead, I've lost everything, my wife wants me to curse God and die. What is going on? My friends are horrible. And then you're just going to hit me with one question after another question after another question. And because that's the way suffering is sometimes, it brings up more questions than we have answers. This book is trying to tell us that we don't always get the answer. And then look what Job does in Job chapter 42, verse 1. Then Job answered the Lord and said, "I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore have I uttered that I understood not, things too wonderful for me which I knew not. Here I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself, and repent in dust and ashes." And it was so that after the Lord had spoken these words unto Job, the Lord, and then he goes on and continues. But Job begins to understand. He didn't understand. He didn't have any knowledge, and he repents. He's not going to say anymore. He's not going to ask any more questions. He cannot answer the questions. He cannot answer the questions. He cannot answer the questions. Let me say it again. He cannot answer the questions. Tragedy and suffering ask questions. They put forth questions we can't answer. We want to answer them. So we come along and we assign answers to the questions, even though when we don't necessarily have the answers. And I think when we do that, we circumvent the power of suffering, because the power of suffering brings us to an end of ourself because we can't answer the questions. We can't understand the reason. There is no perceivable purpose other than what we want to give it. And when we do that, we miss out the power of suffering is to bring us to the end of ourselves. We don't have the answers. I don't care how many sermons I've heard on the book of Job, and you can tell me, oh, this is all wonderful. It's a story of joy. God did this wonderful thing to Job. Isn't God so great? He did all these wonderful things to Job to make him better. And I'm going to continue to raise my hand and go, there were 10 dead children that everyone seems to just want to forget because, hey, see, this was wonderful. It worked out great for Job. There's 10 dead children. No answer can explain that. God just killed 10 dead children. 10 children he just killed. They're dead. Hey, because, I need to make Job a little better spiritually. I need to purify him a little bit. You telling me God can't work out some kind of sanctification without killing children, without allowing children to die? And I say God killing them because God set up the whole situation. He let it happen knowing what was going to occur. Now, yes, Satan does it, but God is the one who allows it and sets up the entire situation knowing exactly what was going to occur. You can't get God off the hook there. You can try, but you can't. We're left with questions we cannot answer, and that's what we have to embrace. Listen, we have to embrace not knowing. We have to embrace not having the answer. We have to embrace that we are brought to the end of ourselves. And in all Job tells us to do, the only lesson is submit, humble yourself. Not to get an answer, not because there is an answer, but because God is God. Now, from a philosophical standpoint, this book sounds absolutely crazy to the person who's not a Christian. Yeah, this book sounds twisted and demented, and I perfectly understand that. Once you come to trust that there is a God, that there is an eternal, transcendent God, and God can do whatever he wants to do, and we are to surrender to him because he is God. We don't surrender to him just because we're going to get an answer. We surrender to him because he is creator, he is sovereign, he is Lord. But suffering brings us to the end of ourselves. I cannot state this enough. The Bible doesn't provide you an answer. We always want to believe that there's an answer, but it doesn't always provide an answer. We're not given answers. The book of Job beautifully points that out. Question, 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 question. I would challenge you, go to Job 38 all the way, I think, to 42. Count every time God asks a question. Count how many questions. And when you get to the number, I don't know what it is. I could probably look it up right now, but I would challenge you to do that. Write down that number and just remember that at next time tragedy or difficulty comes to your life, because it will, just remember how many questions Job was given without an answer. Yeah, and when you look at how many questions you have, you can go, I feel the same way. And Job was brought to an end to himself. He was never given the answer, and neither will you, and neither will I. In most cases. Now, sometimes later on, we can kind of see, well, there was something good that came from that. Sometimes we can perceive it, but just make sure that we're not allowing suffering to give us a wrong perception. Sometimes we just have to embrace, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer. We had, a 6-year-old girl go missing? Was it South Carolina, I believe? They found her dead. You got an answer? Now, yes, I understand the reason. We live in a fallen world. I have 2 daughters. They're still alive. Both my parents died a long time ago. Other people's parents still alive. There's no, sometimes we're left with so many things that don't make sense. And I know Christians want to give answers, but I think what we do is we give false answers, false reasons, and we assign a narrative to a book like Job that the book of Job does not give us. The narrative it gives us is Job suffers. Job is not told why. He's not given an answer why. He's only bombarded with questions he cannot answer. He ultimately ends up saying he'll be silent, and he abhors and repents for what he had done, because he understands he doesn't have the knowledge and he can never understand it. Nobody wants to be in a position that after all my suffering, what did I learn? I don't have the answers and I don't have the knowledge. That's what you learned from it? Yeah, we want that great testimony that go, after all this tragedy, I learned these 5 things. I think we perceive that we learned those 5 things because we feel like we have to say we've learned something. I'm just going to say, I learned that I don't have the answers. Suffering brings us to the end of ourselves. And again, you can send me 900 emails, try to give me all the reasons. You can try to make the book of Job sound like this wonderful story. I'm just going to keep pointing to you. 10 dead children. I don't care what wonderful thing you could say God did for Job. You still have 10 dead children. I'll stop there. I apologize again if this upset anyone. I know this is a very, very, very sensitive thing to discuss and talk about. I know there's people with great suffering. I wish that when people suffer, I could just simply say, here's the answer. Don't you feel better? But from all the suffering that I've encountered in my life, the death of my mother, the things that happened, all the things, I could just go on and on and on. I've just learned I don't always have the answers, and I've been brought to the end of myself. All right, you can email me. Please email me if you are suffering. Anything I can do. I mean, I can't give you answers because I'm not going to give you fake answers. But I will pray for you. There's one of our listeners in Ohio. I'm praying for her family right now. I know she's suffering. I don't know if she will listen to all of this. I hate that. A family in our church, one of the men in our church, his mother just died. We had a family in our church, their daughter was murdered. I've seen suffering, and I don't try to give people answers. I know sometimes that bothers people, but sometimes I don't know. I don't think there's an answer. But you can email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. I know this is not the typical Christian podcast, the way Christian podcasts typically work on this subject, but I think we may have misread the book of Job. I think we may have assigned a narrative to it that's not accurate. And I think we've done so because suffering gives us a wrong perception. We need a different perception to make us feel better. But we need truth more than we need comfort. All right. Thank you for listening to this special live broadcast on this Tuesday evening. God bless.